Control your emotions. Gain balance, resilience, and calm. Find freedom from stress, anxiety, and negativity. Written by Patrick King. Narrated by Russell Newton. Though I wasn't the best student in school, I was able to develop a close friendship with my high school English teacher, Mr. Locke. I'm not sure why he took an interest in me, but I suppose a convenient narrative is that he's the reason I ended up as a writer, and I have him to thank for all of it. Unfortunately, that would be false to say, as it's not remotely what we talked about most of the time. Throughout the whole year, it was enlightening to ask him about the books we were reading for class and what he actually thought about them. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer? Overrated. The Great Gatsby? His favorite of all time. Of Mice and Men? He preferred the movie. However, things got really interesting when the end of the year drew close, and he started to open up about the people in my class, my peers. Of course, this was a dream come true for me, an adult willing to gossip with me about my fellow students. Looking back, it was wildly inappropriate for Mr. Locke to engage in such topics with me, but it's not like the other teachers weren't doing it amongst themselves anyway. He would let me in on a little secret of his. Whenever he had to give negative feedback, he would always make sure to try to build up the individual student a couple of days before. He would do this to make sure their self-esteem, at least in the realm of his class, was sufficiently high, such that his negative feedback wouldn't have as big of an impact. He wanted students to not take things so personally and be able to separate his comments on their work from them as a person. Too many students in the past had received his feedback in less than ideal ways. He wanted them to hear, "This paper could use work," not "You need work." My teenage mind was blown away, and I told him that he was so clever to use Jedi mind tricks on his students. He told me there were a few students he would do this on more than others because he felt they had low self-esteem or he knew they were being bullied outside of his class. My adult mind still admires him and thinks that he had tremendous insight into how people worked, especially future adults that were still figuring themselves out and who had fragile egos. It wasn't until much later that I realized he was helping students gain emotional resilience through raising their self-esteem. Self-esteem is an essential component of emotional resilience and is often deemed the immune system of emotions. When it's high, you can handle what's thrown your way, and when it's low, you're more likely to collapse under scrutiny. Mr. Locke had somehow dialed into that and instilled that into his students. Emotional resilience is a trait that is like the background music in a movie. When it's there, you don't notice it, and it seems that scenes just fit together without a hitch. However, if it's missing, suddenly, words are taken the wrong way, everything feels wrong, and the scene falls apart. In other words, you notice it when you need it, but not when you don't. Therein lies the conundrum of resilience, emotional stability, and strength in the face of tragedy and despair. How do you get it before you need it, and how do you know if you don't have it? The ugly truth is that none of us are naturally born with it. Some of us are put into nasty situations where we develop coping mechanisms for strength, but that doesn't mean you are resilient. It just means the dam hasn't broken yet. And what will you do when the dam breaks? It can be a scary realization or an empowering one. I've gotten this far without being truly resilient. Good things are ahead. It's all downhill from here. The hope for this book is to arm you, whoever you are and whatever you may or may not have suffered, with tools and techniques to persevere and thrive. Emotional resilience is one of those rare qualities that cause a drastic shift in how you see the world. More importantly, it allows you to see you and gain better self-awareness of your thought patterns and behaviors. First understanding, and then being able to harness and master your emotions gives you a lens of safety and control over the world, which gives you the feeling of being able to do anything. Emotions are a major part of our existence and our identity as humans, yet we don't often take a moment to think about where they come from, what they mean, why we feel certain ways, and how emotion actually affects us. Why did I cry at that movie? Because it was sad. But why did I cry? Because that's what you do when you're sad. But why? We just accept that we are affected and don't take the time to think about how to strengthen or regulate certain emotions for greater well-being. Unfortunately, it's this lack of attention that leads precisely to a lack of resilience. If you don't understand the forces at work inside your brain, you can only fall prey to them, with no hope of regulating or even combating them. As such, we're completely at the whims of our emotional brain. Mastering and conquering our emotional brains requires a bit of knowledge and background into what you're going to be battling. How do emotions function? What is their role? And why are they capable of completely dictating our lives? Emotional origins. What makes us feel emotions? How do we know and understand what we feel and why we feel it? If you were to ask 100 people to answer those questions, you'd probably get 100 answers. Ultimately, it boils down to a study in neuroscience, but we'll first explore two standard theories to explain the emotions that color our lives. The first theory is called the cognitive appraisal theory, put forth by Swiss psychologist Klaus Scherer. This theory states that emotions are judgments about the extent that a current situation meets your expectations and goals, no matter how you define them. Happiness is felt because it is an evaluation that your expectations are being met or even exceeded. If you win the lottery, you feel happiness because it solves your financial needs and likely exceeds your expectations. If you're asked out on a date, you feel happiness because it holds the promise of satisfying your romantic needs. In the same way, when you feel sadness, it is an evaluation that your goals are not being met or fall below expectations, and anger might be the feeling that is aimed at whatever's blocking your goals. Here, emotions are an instinctual reaction to objects or situations that relate to your expectations and goals. Often, our goals are not clearly defined, as they can be both subconscious and conscious. You may not be able to say exactly why you're happy or disappointed at times. This theory sheds light on the fact that you subconsciously held some type of expectation that was or was not met. If you are unemployed and presented with a job offer, you'll feel happiness because you see it as a way to solve your financial worries. Alternatively, if you lose your job, you are saddened because you lose your financial stability. Your emotions are tied to how your status quo changes, another way we hold expectations we don't realize. In some cases, it may have little to do with the situation itself. Maybe you've always hated your job and have always wanted to leave it, but when you're faced with the unexpected loss, you are saddened because it represents the loss of stability and your future career. The cognitive appraisal theory speaks to your perception of how well a situation meets your goals and expectations, so your emotions will be a reflection of that. Understanding this theory means that you can better evaluate your emotions by always determining what they are oriented toward. It essentially states that your emotions require something to revolve around. This could seem overly simplistic, and indeed, it's mostly useful for background for other, more involved theories of emotion. It might serve as a good rule of thumb, however, and help you realize if you're holding subconscious expectations one way or another. The second explanation of the nature of emotions is that they are purely an interpretation of the body's signals. Psychologists William James and Carl Lang propose that emotions are just the perceptions of change in the physiology of your body. For example, changes in your heart rate, breathing, perspiration, and hormone levels. This theory argues that emotions, such as happiness, are merely a physiological perception instead of a judgment, as the previous theory states. Other emotions, like sadness and anger, are also mental reactions to different kinds of biological functions. According to James and Lang, your body's state will change first as a reaction to an external stimulus, which will spur you to associate an emotion with it. For example, imagine you're about to perform a speech in front of a group of people, and think of your body's reaction beforehand. You might feel your heart pumping faster or your breathing increasing slightly. Your mind will associate the combination of these physical reactions with a feeling of nervousness. There is undoubtedly a connection between emotions and physiological changes. However, the problem with this account is that bodily states are not nearly as fine-tuned or diverse as the many different kinds of emotions. Returning to the previous example, your heart pumping and increased breathing may also be interpreted as a feeling of excitement because of the close physiological similarities. This is the problem with associating emotions with physical reactions, because you often have more emotions than reactions, and many biological responses are too similar to differentiate. Understanding that emotions may be tied to your physical reactions means you may be able to convince yourself of alternative emotions. Imagine you're about to partake in some public speaking. Telling yourself that you are excited instead of nervous, considering the similarity in bodily reactions, may help you better face the task ahead of you. It can be quite beneficial to perceive negative physiological signs and use them for positive purposes. Neither of these theories tell the entire story. One is focused on emotions as thoughts, and the other is focused on emotions as physiology. In truth, they work hand in hand. Emotions, in the most general definition, are a neural impulse that moves you to act. They're something the brain commands to achieve a better existence, one that has evolved over time to help us survive and meet certain needs. Psychologist Linda Davidoff defines emotion as a feeling that is expressed through physiological functions such as facial expressions, heartbeat, and certain behaviors such as aggression, crying, or covering the face with hands. According to her, emotions are a result of changes in the brain, where neurochemicals such as dopamine, noradrenaline, and serotonin increase or lower the brain's activity level according to what is more beneficial in the circumstances. For example, the human emotion of love is proposed to have evolved from circuits in the brain that were stimulated and designed for the care, feeding, and grooming of offspring. Having offspring around eventually cemented these pathways and associated it with positive nurturing behavior. Emotion makes us act a certain way based on the stimuli that we have processed, and it is the interpretation of a series of physical changes. When you are in a situation where your palms begin to sweat, your heartbeat increases, and you're actively searching your surroundings, your body will do these physical things without much thought. They're reactive. But your mind will subsequently interpret the combination of these behavioral changes with a feeling of fear. First, you have the stimuli, then the physical reactions, and then the psychological reaction, the emotion, that comes after. It's important to note that often the brain is wrong, and the brain's concept of beneficial is not always compatible with the modern age. When neurologists deeply explored the brain, they discovered that depression, love, kindness, aggression, abstract thinking, judgment, patience, instincts, and memories all have specific biochemical causes and even physical locations. Because all of these feelings, emotions, and characteristics have foundations in the brain, this means that they can all be radically affected by brain damage and brain surgery. One of the most famous examples of brain structure-altering emotions and personality is the curious case of Phineas Gage. In 1848, a work explosion led to a metal pole going straight through Gage's skull. Despite the injury, he survived, albeit with an enormous hole in his skull and with a sizable part of his brain missing for the rest of his life. The damage to his frontal lobes caused a radical change in his personality and character. Prior to the accident, he was conscientious, upright, and respected. After the accident, he was suddenly abusive, profane, irritable, and irresponsible. He was simply a different person, unrecognizable to family and friends. There was no other possible conclusion other than the areas that were destroyed regulated certain parts of the personality and certain emotions. Later, Neurologists explain this more precisely, in that the brain's frontal lobes are associated with moderating impulse behavior, setting goals, and other abstract areas of thought. Those around him described him as having become fitful, irreverent, prone to the grossest profanity which was not previously his custom, and a child in his intellectual capacity, but with the animal passions of a strong man. Gage's case was one of the first true revelations that proved that emotions originated from a biological source and were a direct result of the brain, instead of being associated with the soul, heart, or simple expectations. Modern research indicates that during events, the sensory information that you pick up is transmitted to the thalamus, the relay center of the brain, before being transferred to the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala instantly processes the information and sends signals so that hormones are released that activate the autonomic nervous system. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex slowly processes the sensory information from the thalamus in the background, a slower system overall. The amygdala causes a person's instantaneous response to an emotion-evoking event. There's no thought in this, it's pure instinct. The brain has evolved to have two different tracks of stimuli processing, one quick and one slower. The quicker one is designed for protection and survival. When the amygdala thinks there's a threat that must be acted upon immediately in one way or another. Alternatively, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for gradual processing, which allows someone to evaluate the emotion-evoking event and even regulate their emotions surrounding it. This fast and slow reaction is something that can be seen in everyday life and is much simpler when seen firsthand. If there's a sound in the middle of the night that wakes you, you will instantly be alert and ready for action, even if you've had little sleep and your whole body is exhausted. This is an instinctual reaction to a threat, so that you have chances at survival. This is something that can easily be traced back as a result of evolution. If you're slow to respond to threats, you will not be able to survive. On the other hand, the slow processing of external stimuli in the prefrontal cortex is for less instinctual emotions. Something like love takes longer to process because of the number of contributing factors. It is not instinctual to feel love when presented with an event or situation. It takes a bit longer and more processing of the overall situation. So, what are emotions? We've discovered that they are part biological and part based on evaluating the world around us. But they're far more than that, as any romantic comedy will show you. Perhaps the best and most helpful way to conceive of emotions is this. They depend on your unique brain chemistry, your circumstances and status quo, your expectations, and your entire life of experiences that inform everything prior. The purpose of emotions. The purpose of emotions really stems from that track of processing that goes directly to the amygdala for instant action. They are one of the most important indicators of what will keep us alive and happy by letting us know what we should avoid and what we should pursue. Think of emotions as the mental version of your sense of taste. You'll avoid foods that don't taste good, such as rotten fruit, because they're likely to be bad for you, and you will actively eat what tastes good to you because they're likely to be good for your health and survival, though not your waistline. Of course, this is why fat tastes amazing and why feces have a foul smell. Emotions go a level further than helping you avoid rotten fruit. They help you avoid dangerous situations, psychological damage, and less subtle dangers that are just as fatal. Emotions lead to the well-being and ultimate survival of both individuals and groups by providing a quick and automated reaction to certain events and circumstances. This is so that we can avoid danger and take advantage of opportunities. This can be seen in both animals and humans. However, unlike animals, human emotions often clash with socially and culturally acquired conventions and rules. In this case, these automated responses may actually be disruptive and less adaptive than consciously deliberated responses. Tears of sadness may have garnered sympathy, but it can also denote weakness and a moment where someone's defenses are down. Emotion is beneficial because it causes an organism to carry out certain preset behaviors that have been adapted over time to lead to the best outcome. In most cases of emotion, our movements lead to developing an intense focus on the object that triggered the emotion, something that focuses all our attention. This can be seen in behaviors like freezing in place, fleeing from a threat, or nurturing our young. All these actions are caused directly because of our reactions to specific emotions. If it's not positive focus, it's negative, paranoid fixation. They both assist survival. An example of this is when a herd of deer is grazing, and even if only one of them hears the slightest noise, the entire herd looks up and concentrates very specifically on its surroundings, and is able to identify and focus on a nearby lion before fleeing. A human example might be when a parent hears their child scream from across the room. They are immediately focused on nothing but their child and develop tunnel vision until they find out what's wrong. This happens because we're inclined to have a much greater focus on the object that causes whatever emotion we're feeling. Along with pure survival instinct, emotions also serve to alert us to threats based on our past experiences. We all develop emotional programs that we adopt in situations that warrant emotion. For example, we've had to learn how and whom we can trust, how to cope with failure, and how to react to death. These all come with behaviors that we have had to learn over time so that we know how to act in certain emotional situations. Based on the above, the purpose of emotions is to first detect evolutionary survival cues, then trigger reactions that have worked in the past and that we have deemed as good solutions to those problems. It is a continuous commentary on how we, and others around us, see the meaning of things. Some emotions are automatically signaled because we have such an immediate and quick reaction to them. Other emotions, such as jealousy or guilt, can be harder to identify and consciously react to. In either case, emotions help us because we're able to see what they are pointing an arrow at. You may have noticed that since emotion has the convenient purpose of keeping us alive, it tends to have a negative bias. Negative emotions are more noticeable to us because attending to negative events is often more important to our survival than dealing with positive events. The worst outcome when you delay a reaction to a positive event, for example, a birthday, a promotion, or a wedding, is that you celebrate a little later than you normally would have. However, with a negative event, there are much worse things that can happen if our reactions are delayed. It seems quite appropriate that we focus on dealing with negative things first, as they have the power to kill us, whereas positive events merely enhance our well-being. There is an infinite number of ways that situations can take a turn for the worse, rather than taking a turn for the better. The night before a big event, we're most often thinking about every single thing that could go wrong, not everything that could go right. If any of these possibilities actually occur, you need to deal with them, so it's better that you imagine them and aren't caught off guard. Appropriately, negative emotions take up more mental bandwidth. Avoiding death is simply more important than eating cake. There's no shame in feeling your emotions. We simply want to do so in an appropriate and healthy manner. In a 2012 survey, psychotherapist Eric L. Garland of Florida State University gathered 58 adults in treatment for alcohol dependence and measured their responses to stress based on heart rate when exposing them to alcohol-related cues. The results found that those who restrained their thinking and suppressed their emotions more had much stronger stress responses to the cues than those who suppressed less frequently. Even if you think you have successfully bypassed a stressor, there's no guarantee that your subconscious has also stopped dwelling on it. In 2011, psychologist Richard A. Bryant of the University of New South Wales in Sydney conducted a study where half the participants were told to suppress an unwanted thought prior to sleep. Those who tried to suppress their thoughts reported that they dreamed about it more, a phenomenon called dream rebound. Both of these studies demonstrate that emotional suppression not only doesn't work, but can also be immensely harmful. It can cause you to fixate more on what you are avoiding and can be detrimental to your physical health. As if this wasn't evidence enough, another study in the United States by experts at the Harvard School of Public Health and the University of Rochester showed that those who fail to say or express how they feel increased their risk of premature death from all causes by about 35%. When researchers evaluated specific causes of death, they uncovered that the risks increased by 47% for heart disease and 70% for cancer. Death rates are highest among those most likely to bottle up their emotion rather than express it to others and let them know how they feel. Emotions are at the center of almost all that we do and who we are, and yet we don't have to be held hostage by them. We must strike a fine balance between fully feeling them, not suppressing them, and regulating them. Takeaways. Our emotions have enormous power over us. Sometimes this is good, and other times it makes us feel completely out of control. This is bad. But there's good reason for this type of power. You can view emotions as a type of warning signal that has evolved alongside humans to keep us alive and healthy. In the absence of higher critical thinking, emotions taught us about the world and how to regard it. This is also the reason that negative emotions can make us spiral out of control so quickly. These types of dangers aren't present anymore in our modern lives, and our task now is less survival and more controlling and harnessing our emotions. The extent to which we do this can wholly determine how our lives go. In no way is this suggesting that emotional suppression is the key to happiness. In fact, emotional suppression is linked to poor health outcomes, so we must simply find the fine line of healthy emotional expression and reaction. This has been Control Your Emotions. Gain balance, resilience, and calm. Find freedom from stress, anxiety, and negativity. Written by Patrick King. Narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2019 by Patrick King. Production copyright by Patrick King.